Oh,
Hello.
howdy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Ah, that's fantastic. How are you doing?
I am doing wonderfully. How are you doing this fine day?
I cannot complain too much. It's actually quite crazy to look outside, see that it is already nighttime over here.
Where are
We
you?
still have timing in the Netherlands.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, you did a stream not so long ago about the farmers in Netherlands and the farmers protest, right? Uh,
Yeah, well, it came up while we were looking at a Russell Brand video. It wasn't a full research dive, but yeah, it came up.
yeah, no, that's the one that ultimately motivated me because I thought well, of course, the conversation that Russell Brand was having with whomever he was talking to was perhaps not, um, yeah, super the most intelligent conversation.
Uh,
But I think you actually did a pretty good job at deconstructing that, to be honest with you.
well, I appreciate that. Maybe, maybe we'll have similar luck with this conversation. So,
I hope so. I hope so.
what's your name or name for the context of this convo? Pronouns and what's on your mind?
Yeah, sure. Well, my pronouns are he, him. Um, nothing, nothing other than that. You can call me Dom, as in Dominic,
Uh,
um, or whatever else. To be honest, it's fine. I think I'll realize that you're talking to me. To be honest with you, so that's okay. Um, and yeah, in terms of what to talk about, to be honest with you, I gave you a pretty long list, as you might remember, and I think I heard you say that before the stream, before the call. There are quite a lot of topics I think that we can talk about. I don't know if you're in the mood for something in particular or a particular theme, perhaps that you'd like to go with.
no, dealer's choice. Hit me with what's on your mind.
All right. So how about we start with the war on Ukraine? I think that's a good one
Yeah.
to start with. So um, I don't know how much you are going to actually agree or disagree with this. I think in the past, the amount of times that I've heard you talk about this, I think this point went under a little bit. And I think when it comes to the war in Ukraine, not enough pressure and not enough attention is actually put on the role that the population plays in Russia on this and the responsibility that they carry as well. There is a lot of messaging around, the regime in Russia being one thing and the population being another thing. I think I just heard you also talk about the contempt that the Russian state, I presume, has for the people in Russia.
Yes.
Um, my experience is somewhat different than that, to be honest. I think with all due respect, I think the people in Russia should take quite a lot of the burden, quite a lot of the blame for the situation that we're currently in, for not doing what many others have done in the past, which is to resist against this kind of oppression, and especially when your own country is doing something in your name that is so antithetical to what you believe in.
I don't really think there's a point in assigning much blame there because there's not much we can do about it. You can petition for a government to change its policy or behavior. You can wage wars
Mm.
against governments, but at the end of the day, the beliefs of the Russian people are largely just going to be a product of the propaganda of the authoritarian country that they live in. And I mean, Russia has been authoritarian for a long time. It's never not been. The Soviet Union was authoritarian. The Tsarist regime was authoritarian. And even after Glasnost or whatever under the Soviet Union, it's never really been a free state. I don't think the Russian people have ever really had an opportunity to develop a strong civil society, so there doesn't seem like much of a reason to fret about their disposition. They are where they're guided, right? So I'd rather focus on the people who actually have the capacity to change things.
Oh well, but they do, right? I mean, they have in the past. So let me ask you this way: so I'm originally German, right? Um, and I think in the let's say the aging or the growing up of every German, probably around the world, there's one very particular moment, at least for those Germans that are old enough to have somebody that was alive in their family that was alive during World War II, which is the question of sort of assigning personal responsibility to the people that were directly related to you, i.e., if you talk to your grandparents, for example, you'll ask them why they let that happen, right? Or where were they when that happened, and why did they just go along? And what you'll find in Russia specifically, you'll actually have quite a lot of people in Russia that are going to have to go either through the same process or are in the same process, because there is a lot of awareness in Russia for what the Russian government is doing. There's a lot of apathy towards it because the main argumentation tends not to be, well, what we're doing is wrong, is right, because there's a genocide in eastern Ukraine. It's more, we choose to believe that because, and it's easier to believe that because the current regime, the current government gives us the stability that we didn't have during the 90s, which is sort of the traumatic event similar to the Weimar Republic in Germany, right? And as a result, now a lot of people in Russia are saying, well, I may not agree with the war, I may not think that that is right, but I'd rather not deal with the potential consequences of me saying anything about it.
That's fine. I don't really
So
care.
why not?
Because there's no material gain at all in fixating on that. There's like
Well,
there's nothing to
mhm.
be gained from like well, why don't we blame the Russian people too? It might actually be optically detrimental as well, because the perception that the world hates them, the Russian people, is one of the ways that foreign authoritarian media like keeps their citizenry under their thumb. The idea of like one of the justifications for the invasion of Ukraine is the idea that Western hegemony is like anti-Russian people, which I don't think it is. I think Western hegemony is just pro-capitalism, frankly. I don't think it gets any more personal than that. But the belief that they're being targeted is one of the things that's going to keep them doubling down on their stated positions, because they think, oh, well, if we're to be blamed for the war, then if we lose, they're coming after us. So I just
Well,
don't. I don't see much of a point. I mean, maybe they could be more gung ho about their opposition to the government, but I can't do anything about it, so it doesn't
right.
seem like something to
Okay.
fixate on.
Okay. So there are three things about that I would unpack. One being Western hegemony about that. I think that's something that is going a little bit on a tangent that we can unpack in a little bit. Then the second thing being there's no point in fixating on something that is not going to lead to any outcome. Now, I agree with that. There's no point in fixating it on it, but I do still think that it is important, because it is especially
Yep.
also important when it comes to what comes after the war and how do you deal with Russia after the war. So to make it very clear, for example, in the when Russia went, one of the main reasons why Eastern Europe is so opposed to the Soviet to Russia now, the era of the Soviet Union, and why there is so much disagreement and it's so difficult for them to get on the same page, is there is not a shared history or a shared understanding of history. Let's say there is a very different understanding of what their shared history is and what it means and what it looks like. Right? I think there was a famous French historian, Renard, who talked about what it means to be a nation. Beautiful paper, a beautiful speech actually, about this shared history concept. And the thing is, if we do not address the population, only address this as this is the government doing it, and we do not recognize any of the people that are involved and the people's will that is involved in this, how do you then suggest that there's going to be a long lasting resolution post Putin? Because surely that is then just going to leave to the next guy stepping in,
I mean, you can.
right?
I think you can address that after the fact, and I can. Obviously, if they've been subject to decades of propaganda and blood and soil ethno-nationalist rhetoric, it needs to be addressed. I just don't see what the point is in fixating on it right now. It doesn't add anything to the analysis. If you oppose the war in Ukraine, we're not proposing a counter attack on Russia. That can't really happen because they're a nuclear nation. There's no counter aggression that's going to be taken. If Putin dies of cancer or some shit, um then hopefully the overwhelming, crippling loss that they experienced in Ukraine would disincentivize the population from throwing their weight behind another strongman, seeing how that worked out for them last time. But, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem
Yeah,
like it's just something I'm not interested in fixating on.
right. But then yeah, and sure we can move on from that. But then exactly because of that reason, I mean, if Putin would die tomorrow, right? you would need the people ideally to comprehend the role that they have to play in all of this. Now, if the message there is, let's not talk about it, let's deal with it when it happens, it might be too late to deal with it then. And it's also not like.
But I think saying like you Russian people are bad too would make them more likely to choose another strongman. People
I
choose
agree.
strongmen because they're afraid, and nothing would make the Russian people
Mm,
more afraid than being fucking dominated by Western hegemony, and then getting the chance to like that is the kind of shit that a strongman would pick up on and weaponize to achieve power. If
right.
if we have
Okay.
the message like, hey, we only want reconciliation, just don't fucking invade people and we'll be fine. Like I think that's less likely to produce a strongman for the next leader.
Uh, I will disagree with that based on. Okay, so two things. So one being, I agree. The message should also not be Russian people are bad. I'm fortunate enough to have Russian people, and I love most Russian people that I know very deeply. It has nothing to do with that. It has more with the importance of assigning responsibility to a group of people that has indeed a power to change, that has the power to change something, and not give them really just a pass on, well, whatever you do, there's nothing you can really do about that. And we shouldn't even address it because of that. And so whatever happens after, we'll deal with it then. But for now, just do whatever you think is right, because what is going to happen, and the Russians are not stupid enough to, and I mean the Russian government by this, they're not stupid enough to think, well, if Putin goes, then everything collapses. There is a pretty strong track record of people that are under Vladimir Putin and that are likely to succeed him should he fall and continue whatever he is doing. Hopefully, obviously not, but that is what it very much looks like. And if the message to the people is, well, we're going to provide, they're going to be giving the message, we're going to be providing you with continuity of the status quo, which is better than what you had before. Because the experience that they had before was the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a lot of messaging along the lines of, well, we just want to work together. Let's be peaceful. You can, start seeing if we could join NATO. Let's see if we, maybe not right away, but maybe in the future, let's start to work together. But you figure yourselves out, right?
It's
In
well,
such a deep.
it's not about
Mhm,
figuring yourselves out or anything. I just don't. I don't have
mhm.
any like advanced or innovative thing to say on this. I just don't think there's any point in like, yeah, it's not just Putin that's bad. The Russian people are bad. I don't think there's any
But I
point in
didn't
adding
say
that.
that, did I?
Well, but if what you're saying is the Russian people are also like brainwashed by fascist like propaganda outlets, then I agree with that. I've never disagreed with that. But you can acknowledge that while still maintaining ultimately that they're kind of like the victims in this whole thing. The Russian
Oh,
people
I
are
agree.
victims of their right. So that I mean that's it. I'm not saying like don't acknowledge that they're wrong by condemning the actions of Putin, who does have the Russian people's support more or less. You are
Right.
condemning the people implicitly. So that's sufficient for me.
Right. So for as long, okay, so that clarifies that position quite clearly, right? Because it means essentially, we are accurate with whom we assign responsibility to without necessarily finger pointing and saying you're bad. Like we acknowledge that, you're doing bad things and you are in the wrong and you have a responsibility perhaps to make sure that this doesn't happen again or that it stopped ideally. But we're not. I'm not saying that all Russian people are wrong because obviously or are bad. Obviously, because I understand that that would mean that I would have to say that my granddad, my grandmother, etc., that they were all horrible people. Because I can completely understand the level of fear and also the level of brainwashing, I guess, to some extent that you suffered through, and that is something that is very difficult to get out of. I do still think, though, that in open discourse, we need to be careful with pretending incorrectly or saying incorrectly that the Russian people are completely opposed to this at all times.
Well, I've never said
And
that.
right, right, right. But it's sort of the message that comes across sometimes, sort of the Russian people are exempt of this, and we should just excuse them. This is not in the name of the Russian people, because to a large degree it is, or at the very least they're apathic enough towards it to preserve themselves, which is, I don't know which one is worse, to be honest. So
Yeah. I mean, I feel like our positions are well laid out here. I don't even know if we disagree with that much.
right, I think it might just be a semantic thing, right? So then in terms of resolution of this conflict, because And I think this goes to the bigger point that I sometimes have, or the bigger issue that I sometimes have with these debates. As you may know, as you may notice, I'm not super great at them. Um, albeit, so let me put it this way: there are a lot of young people watching, right? And a lot of, I would hope, there's a lot of diversity in your crowd. And I've been in your chat now a couple of times, and it's not a criticism or anything like that, but the level of discourse and the way to have discourse is sometimes, for lack of a better word, toxic, in the sense that it can be not super solution oriented, but more problem oriented. Sort of people getting entrenched in their own positions. Also in the debates that you have, right? People are. It seems more like a matter of winning a debate than it seems a matter of finding a solution, right? So if we apply that then and we try to actually find a solution maybe to the war in Ukraine, what do you think the ideal solution would be? How would you get there? And what do you think we can do differently in order to get there?
Well, the solution is just Ukraine winning, right? It's as simple as that. They take as much of their territory back as they can, and they do so with the overwhelming military supremacy that we can sell them, and that's the win,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the best you can do.
And you, so let's be then um, a little bit more specific. So if you say that you want Ukraine to win, I want Ukraine to win. I think most of the world wants Ukraine to win. I don't even doubt that some Russians want Ukraine to win, to be honest, at this point. But what would that look like specifically? Would that be, they just bomb the Russian military away until they recover all of their territory, including Crimea, excluding Crimea?
They're probably not getting Crimea back. But yeah, like I mean, ideally, just the line of conflict would advance to the point where, at the very least, it would reach the old line in the Donbass that's been held, more or less since 2014. I don't think they're getting Crimea back, and if it gets held all the way back to that point, I mean, you can let the Russians have their cope like People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk, if they really want. Ideally, I think they would take back all the Donbass, but to be honest, I don't even know if Ukraine would want that part of the Donbass back at this point. It might be more trouble than it's worth because they've been subject to like an 8-year proxy war propaganda campaign on the part of Russia, and I think the collective
Mm-hmm.
GDP of the Russia-controlled part of the Donbass is like 5. So Ukraine might be better just not getting that back and opening its borders to any refugees from the Donbass region who want to make it into Ukraine proper. That's probably the best they can do. Same with Crimea. I don't think they can take back Crimea, though.
All right. So then let's assume that, the Ukrainian position so far, which has been overt, right? The explicit position that Zelensky has taken has been, we're going to take everything back. And the Russian position still is, we're going to essentially take and liberate Donetsk and Luhansk and possibly, Russia is a funny thing because the Russian government messaging is a funny thing because when you see the likes of Medvedev and Lavrov giving messages, it's almost like a way to probe the public without burning Putin's hand, right? And if you look at that, I mean, it's pretty evident that they still want to go for most of Ukraine at least, right? If not all of it. And who knows what's further. But let's say we are there. Let's say we are at your proposed scenario. Ukraine has beaten back the Russian forces behind that line, and they haven't retaken Crimea. What happens then? Do we freeze the conflict and just hope that everybody sort of like stays there until Putin dies, and then hopefully somebody new comes in that doesn't do the same thing?
Um, yeah, pretty much all you can do, right? Ukraine's economy is going to bounce back really hard after the conflict is done with, because the Western markets are just going to explode with investment. Like, we are on the ground ready. Russia won't. Russia's economy is going to stall for decades because of this war. So
Mm-hmm.
past a certain point, I have a feeling that this might turn into one of those like forever wars in name only, where Ukraine maybe, I mean, Ukraine could still lose this war. It's possible, but in the best case scenario, where Ukraine pushes it all the way back to the old Donbass territory borders to Crimea, and then the war never necessarily ends, but it just turns into an interminable set of skirmishes across those fighting lines. But
Right.
that would cost Russia way more than it would cost Ukraine. So hopefully that wouldn't be sustained forever.
Right, but what tells you then that unlike what happened in the past, right, where Russia took over Crimea and then took over part of the Donbas and then just sort of regained their strength, let's say, a little bit before they were ready to invade. What tells you that they're not going to do that? And what tells Russia that Ukraine is not going to do that? I mean, Minsk was a pretty solid agreement actually in especially Minsk too in terms of the rules that were set. But everybody violated that because everybody thought that they could violate that. So how do you make sure in that scenario that nobody does? Because I can guarantee almost 100% that they will.
Oh, I don't
Right?
know.
There's
I can't see the future. They probably won't. As long as Russia is like this, it can never be trusted for anything pertaining to like Ukraine sovereignty. I don't really
true.
care about the details here. I just want overwhelming firepower in the hands of our people, the Azov Battalion, fighting back against Russia. Um,
Yeah,
that
I
is
don't know if
enough
the
for me.
messaging. Yeah, I don't know if the messaging ought to be in the Azov battalion specifically because it comes a little bit with a weird connotation now on. But I agree with the sentiment, and I think the same way. Right? I think we're not doing enough to arm them. I just don't know, and I don't see the solution here long term
No,
because
I
I
think
don't.
we're doing okay. We need to give them way more weapons, though. We need to commit to giving them a large number of the same types of vehicles rather than giving them five each of a bunch of different types of tanks and artillery systems that their engineering teams have to read whole new manuals on. You know, the manual to like a modern day mobile artillery system is probably like 3,000 pages thick, and I feel really bad for their engineers furiously translating
Mhm.
the English into Ukrainian to try to figure it out. Um
Yeah, yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I don't think that they're having that difficult a time with Western weapons. To be honest,
well, we could
um,
always make it easier for them. Give them a little,
yeah,
like the
uh,
way that if you have a game console like the Switch or whatever and you boot it up for the first time, it's like, "Hello. Uh what language would you like to use? Are you left-handed or right-handed? Are the targets far away or nearby?" And just give them the nice easy one. Well, optimized for user
Jesus.
convenience.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, no, I mean that'd be fantastic, right? But I mean, I think at the end of the day, what you'll find is that bureaucracy gets in the way of most of these things because at the end of the day, we do have relatively inefficient governments dealing with this. Although I have to say, I mean, this is where the military budget of the United States really comes to show itself as being a relatively good thing, at least for this purpose, because the rest of Europe is kind of struggling with getting any kind of supply line going. But I mean, still, I don't think we have arrived at a satisfactory conclusion of this because you're not going to get anything that I mean, I don't hear a solution here that is other than, well, we hope that the Ukrainians just blast the Russian army away. We hope that the Russians don't use nukes on Ukraine, and we cannot really trust them. So I guess in a couple of years we may have the same thing happening again.
Yeah, I mean, not much else we can do, right? There are no solutions to this. I mean, there's not. We're talking about like warfare, right? There are no like. It's not like a logic puzzle where if you find the correct answer, the thing is resolved. You give them the guns, you give them the ammo, you hope things work out. Whether or not they do, we have to know what to do next. Um, but I think the current path that we're on is a relatively fortuitous one. They've completely given up on taking Kiev, which is a massive sign of weakness since they said they'd be able to take it in 3 days. Um, Morale has remained low for the Russians and high for the Ukrainians. And though we don't have exact numbers on losses, I think basically everyone agrees that Russia is losing far more men and far more equipment than Ukraine is in every engagement. So, I
Yeah,
mean, as long as that
albeit
keeps up,
albeit they have a much larger pool of reservists that they haven't
we
tapped
could
into,
always
right?
nuke Russia if it comes to that. Don't worry, it's always on the table.
You- yeah, at least ours will reach, right? I don't know if theirs will,
Yeah, those will
but
those will explode in the fucking hangar.
I wouldn't be surprised at this point, to be honest. That was one of the funnest things. Um, Also, a little bit on my background. I'm actually quite familiar um, with the Russian military, to be honest. Having had, I don't want to discuss too much, but having worked in the field, um, also lived in Russia for a lot for quite a while. And what really surprised me was the shock and awe that people were in to see that the Russian military was so bad. Um, because if you've been in Russia for 5 minutes, you'll realize that for every billion that goes into the Russian army, about 99% of that are going to go into the hands of some apparatchik, and they're always denote this as administrative costs.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's
they've
not
been
surprising at all,
they've
to be
been
honest.
Call of Duty villains a couple times. You know, we pump them up in the media. Now we can't use
True.
them. We have to use the Chinese as our villains in all of our fucking gung-ho Warhawk video games now, because nobody's gonna buy Russians as a credible threat.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's gonna be fun, good for Chinese actors, I guess. But I mean, or somebody that's going to make a better
Crisis used
racist
North
impression.
Korea. That was a joke.
Sorry, what?
Oh, the game Crisis used North Korea, which was
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. Of
one where you're in
course.
like the cyber advanced futuristic super suit and you're fighting against fucking North Koreans. I remember that feeling a bit weird when I played that game. It's like, what? Like that feels like a massive mismatch. Like why they're sending me in with a fucking RoboCop suit and I'm fighting against the world's most impoverished dictatorship. It's yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know.
I kid you not. To be honest, I don't know if how much do you know about the coup in Guatemala in the 40s
Uh not very
or
much.
50s actually. Yeah, okay. No, but that must have felt pretty alike, to be honest. That's the United Fruit Company that was over there when Jacobo Arbenz was trying to pull a agrarian reform, and the CIA said no. And this is actually not even a conspiracy theory. I mean, the documents have been released to the public. And then a while, I actually in the 2000s, I think, or in the 90s, the U.S. offered to repay or to pay a large or to sort of nullify the Guatemalan debt as an apology for injecting a bunch of Guatemalans with syphilis at the time. And
Oh, that's a classic
something,
move.
yeah, that's not too different to some of the things that happened in concentration camps, right? Um, but then the Guatemalan president, full of pride, trying to pull on nationalist sentiment, obviously said no to that offer, which was brilliant. But if you look at, I mean, still, so if we go back to this issue and trying to resolve it, then in the
Notice
long term, I
Kharkiv is
mean,
one of only two cities on the Western Front that managed to repel the Russian forces. Chat, learn. Sorry,
yeah, I
yeah.
know, I know. Kharkiv is actually it's actually a great place. There are a lot of refugees from Kharkiv over here in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
And
yeah, a lot of yeah, a lot of families escaping Kharkiv.
how, how many
Yeah,
people have
so
been taken
anyway,
by?
yeah, no solutions, maybe we'll nuke them. Yeah, that's my position on Ukraine.
Okay, quite interesting. So no solutions. Maybe we'll nuke at them. Okay, I appreciate the honesty at the very
It's the
least with that.
State Department's official line as well. I'm just parroting it.
You think? I don't know, man. Like for me, the one way that this gets resolved because of that is going back to what we were talking about earlier, which is a long-term solution, which is change within Russia. That's the only
Oh,
way that you're really going to
no,
change
yeah,
this, right?
I agree. Um Ukraine is never going to have. I guess the one good thing is Ukraine. I don't think Ukraine is not getting Crimea back, and I don't think Ukraine is going to be able to get the contested Donbass territory either. Maybe, but I
Mm,
doubt it. The plus side is though is that after this war is done, I think Ukraine's borders finally get to be permanent. Like Ukraine has
mm,
existed on paper since the early 90s, but this right here is like the cementing of their borders, right? Like their
mhm,
Ukraine's borders have been theoretical. They've existed at the behest of Russia. But this right here is
mm.
like actually like branding them into the map.
Right.
So
Do
after
you
this
think?
is done,
Yeah.
maybe they'll be safe. That's the hope, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think then Crimea we should all just accept as a world community that Crimea is Russian and not do anything about it anymore? Because it's a little bit unfair to the people in Crimea, right, to not really know what's going to happen to them.
It is, yeah. I think there should be an effort to allow refugees from Crimea to get into Ukraine. It's just logistically, Crimea is really fucking difficult to get into. There are only a couple of bridges across. It would be incredibly difficult to move in. And Crimea is like culturally more aligned with Russia than Ukraine. Back in 2014, they did some bullshit polling back then on whether like the Crimeans wanted to be part of Russia, and it was like a fake poll. It was like some Hitler bullshit. But
Yeah.
even leaving
Well,
aside that poll, the people in Crimea are like the most Russia-leaning
but
group,
but
which just it would make it so hard to reconquer
yeah.
Crimea.
Although you also know why, right? I mean, this comes from the fact that the Russians have had a base there forever,
Yeah. Oh yeah. No,
and
it's not fair.
they
It's not a
force
fair.
populated the place.
It's not a fair situation at all. Ethically, like if Ukraine could just do whatever they wanted with no like consequences, I think they should retake Crimea. Um, but like
Mm,
in a practical sense, it would be a monumentally difficult area to take. It would be ridiculously, and they wouldn't have the sympathies of the occupied territory either. Not the way they do like everywhere else here, you know. Same with the Donbass area that's been held since 2014 by Russian separatists. Like they
oh, that's
could
interesting.
move in there, but like a lot of the people in this area would be opposed to Ukraine military intervention. So it would just be really, really difficult. And it would lead to a lot of like personnel losses. It would lead to losses in morale. Like imagine how it would make the Ukrainian military look if they moved into Crimea and like there were video footage of like villagers throwing like rocks at them, like, you know, get out you invaders or whatever. Like even if it's not reality, even if it was just a misrepresentation of the situation, that would make Ukraine look really bad, whereas they're unambiguous liberators of all the territory Russia's taken. Anyway, it's just
Yeah,
that's just my general opinion, you know.
yeah. Well, that's an interesting one, to be honest, because it is true. Crimeans want to be, or I mean, the people that live in Crimea, except for perhaps Crimean Tatars, who that's a completely different discussion, of course, but they want to be part of Russia. So I think what we as Europe have been struggling a lot with is this redrawing of the borders, which we have agreed that we were not going to be doing after World War II. We still did in Kosovo, of course, but that's a bit of a different scenario.
That was trolling.
But when it yeah, that was just like a one-off just to prove people that we could, right? If we really wanted to. But I mean, this one was when it comes to Crimea, I do think, especially you're an anarcho-syndicalist, right?
Uh,
Um,
you know, it's been said. There's some contest on that.
Okay, so the jury is still out on that one. I appreciate that. Well, but I mean, when it comes to Crimea itself, who should be the one that actually decides that? Right? Should it be the people that live in Crimea? Should it be us just as a global community saying, no, we're not doing any redrawing of the borders? Crimea belonged to Ukraine, so Ukraine decides what happens with Crimea?
The problem here is one of like we're talking fundamentally about the right of independence movements. Now, this is
Hmm.
really complicated. Generally speaking, independence movements are doomed. And the reason for that is that like almost always the logistics and planning and resources necessary to create a whole new country and operate independently while sharing a border with the country you just seceded from is insanely difficult. Like, normally it
Hmm.
takes a third party to intervene and maintain that border, you know, like a la East West
Often, yeah.
Germany type. Yeah, like normally it's like a forced situation, not an organic, because otherwise the stronger country would just invade the weaker one, like every time, you know. That's what did in Kosovo, right? Like NATO had to step in. Um,
Yeah.
so it like usually I'm not in favor of independence movements on a purely consequential basis. If I think there's a chance of them working out, or if the need for them is that great, I'll generally support them. So, for example, Kurds in Turkey and Iraq. I'm totally
Yeah.
in favor of Kurdistan if there's a shot. If there's not a shot, it's a one-way ticket to getting like just obliterated from the air from Turkey. Turkey will
Right.
rain NATO ammunition and ordnance down on them until there is just a smoking crater where Kurdistan existed for 3 weeks. Um,
Right.
with
Yeah. So,
Taiwan. Oh, sorry. I just want because I don't want to be misinterpreted. With Taiwan, I'm in favor of it because Taiwan has functionally been a sovereign country for 70 years. With Crimea, Crimea cannot operate as an independent country. It just can't. It can't. It can be a puppet state of either Ukraine or Russia, or a part of Ukraine or Russia. But Crimea doesn't. There's not enough territory. There's not enough anything for it to be here on its own. So
yeah, but they don't want to either, right? I mean, if you ask most people in Crimea, they want to be part of Russia at this
I
point,
think
whether
I
it's
think it
by propaganda or
I
not,
think it
right?
might be split. I don't know where it lies exactly. If right now, like wartime is the time when borders are drawn. Where the
Hmm.
Crimean people want to be, I think should be the deciding factor here, because this isn't like an easy gimme for either side.
Yeah, no,
You
I completely understand. But just because something isn't easy doesn't mean that it's something we shouldn't do, right? I
well,
mean,
it depends.
difficulty is not. Mhm.
Are we making their lives better, right? I mean, are Crimean lives going to be better if Ukraine
Yeah,
controls the area? In my opinion, yes. I think Ukraine is way doper than Russia. But can Ukraine reconquer this area? If they can't, the attempt to do so might worsen the lives of Crimeans far more than just them being left to Russia because of the devastation of the war. I mean, imagine if like the Forever War gets drawn out to here for like 8 months. There wouldn't be any Crimea anymore. It would just be like a, you know, like a little Innsmouth crater.
yeah,
So I'm just conscientious about stuff like that. It really depends on where the tide of war swings. If Russia's in full retreat though, and they completely abandon like every bit of territory they don't have fortifications in, or you know, well they do have fortifications in Crimea, but if they leave Crimea, I think Ukraine should step in. But if it doesn't seem like it'd be an easy get. It could be a very destructive take, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, if you go back to yeah, okay. I mean, I think we can have that there. I don't think that we're going to find a meaningful resolution that is going to be long term anyway, right?
You
Because
can't see the future.
the way that I'm trying to yeah, exactly. The way that I'm trying to think about this is, well, in 50, 60, 70 years, what will this look like? Right? Because that's how long those countries are going to be existing for hundreds of years, right? Hopefully thousands of years. So then the question becomes, what's the best long-term strategy here to position them? And then when you talk about Taiwan, and I think this is a weak point in general. I mean, Taiwan started to be a country because the nationalist government of China fled there, right? And when during the Mao uprising, um, and then they sort of went in there. The Chinese didn't have enough to actually go conquer Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. So then you say, okay, it's been a country though. By today's standard, we would say absolutely they don't have a right to be a country, right? That's in the independence movement. You're against that. You don't like that, et cetera, et cetera. But it's been 70 years. So because of that, now it's okay. So now they are a country. Now they should exist. So
Well,
then you look at that.
it's a consequential thing. Taiwan has clearly demonstrated that it can exist as an independent sovereign nation, and at this point, any effort to disrupt that would just begin another war. If the war is still ongoing, like if it was back in 1949 or whatever, I wouldn't really mind the PRC taking over Taiwan that much, because that's like the ongoing war. The ROC would have just fled there. I mean, it would be a continuation of an existing conflict. The people there
Mhm.
would have fled the war that was still happening. Nowadays, though, there are 3 generations of people who have known nothing but peace in Taiwan. It's not a continuation of any conflict in like a real material sense, only in some abstract legal one. In reality, Taiwan is a separate country, like in every meaningful sense. So it's just an invasion. When borders change hands makes a big difference, right? After World War One or World War Two ended, we did take parts of German territory and yeet them back to their original owners, right? Like,
Right.
the Austria, whatever, like we reorganized it. But imagine if today, like France and England declared war on Germany because there's some other bit of territory they wanted to take. That 80-year difference between now and the end of World War II actually makes a pretty huge difference in the context of the land reacquisitions of like following conflict.
Yeah, so what you're saying, but yeah, I agree with that to some degree, but I still think it kind of sets the precedent that for if you conquer land and if you can hold it long enough, then that's enough.
Yeah.
You know,
No, I
so
believe that. Yeah.
so if Putin now casts Crimea and he holds it for 70 years, on all the parts of the Donbas, Ukraine just will not have a claim on it anymore, right?
100%, yeah. If
Okay,
Russia
that's
held
interesting.
those areas uncontested and were part of their country for 70 years, I would completely oppose Ukraine like beginning a war to retake their historical territory. Because at that point,
Right.
it's only historical territory. It's not like a part of an existing thing that's being fought over.
So what's the year number then where you draw the line?
I don't think I don't have an exact line. I think a lot of it comes down to like what is the material reality of the area that we're talking about, right? Um
Yeah.
is the area still war torn? Is it like suffering? Is it still like bearing the weight of the conflict that led to the border dispute? Is it unresolved? Is it really unresolved in reality, not just in legality? There are plenty of wars from like 500 years ago that never got officially resolved in like in like writing, like that. I don't really care about the legality here. In Taiwan, like Taiwan is a peaceful separate country. So in every material sense, like it is totally separate. I think you could probably make this argument not 70 years, but probably just a couple of years after conflict. No, actually, not even a couple of years. If conflict is done, I think it's done. I don't think you should reopen old wounds. If a nation conquers an area, even if the initial conquest is kind of fucked, I don't think you should then go like, yeah, time to reconquer again, even if it's just a year later, unless there's some existing occupation you're fighting against. Because I think there's a different context there. If there are people in an area that are being occupied, like in an imperial or colonial sense, fighting to liberate them is different from simply fighting to reacquire territory because it used to be yours. I just want peace, you
Right.
know? Um, and you can bring peace by reestablishing old borders in the current conflict, but I can't think of a time ever where peace has been brought about by starting a war to reclaim historical territory. That seems like it's just an overall bad, you know. Back at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was a UN delegate who did a speech on how destructive it can be to wage war to reclaim old borders. Because like if done in Africa, like that would lead to interminable, infinite, constant infighting with no end. Was
Hmm.
that Kenyan? The Kenyan representative? Yeah, that was a really good speech. I think I agree completely with that guy. You have to live and let live past a certain point.
Okay, interesting, because it's so antithetical to what I think European doctrine over the last 70 years has been, at least Western European doctrine, of making sure that conflicts are resolved correctly, which is really hilarious to think about when you think about the fact that the UK and France specifically have been responsible for some of the worst map drawings in the last, well, it's been forever, to be honest. Kurdistan obviously being one of the impacted by that. But I mean, I think to be honest, this part of the conversation has been quite interesting from the point of view that it was actually quite civil because we agree on most of it. I just find it entertaining to know that there's a lot of opinion on this, but not really a meaningful solution that is being proposed. So that's there. I am
All right.
happy though to talk to you about something that is a little bit perhaps more contentious.
I'm happy to as well.
Uh,
Just 1 second. I see somebody in chat I have to snipe out. Vaush wants peace unless somebody challenges US hegemony. Bro, the only two people challenging US hegemony right now are Russia, who started a war, and Taiwan, who are threatening to start a war. I'm really
no,
sorry.
China.
America. Sorry, China. Not did I say Taiwan? Taiwan threatening to invade the mainland. I'm sorry.
A Freudian slip, huh?
I refer to mainland China as Taiwan because there's only one Taiwan. No, the America's not starting any wars right now, bro. It's them. Like right now, U.S. hegemony is the pro-peace side. I can't believe like that's on you guys, right? I can't believe you guys made the American hegemony ticket the anti-war ticket, but that's on you. I mean, we didn't make Russia invade Ukraine or make China get ass pained about Taiwan. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah.
yeah.
Um,
No, that's a strange one. I don't think anybody's actually challenging U.S. hegemony on any front, to be honest.
well, not directly, of course. Nobody can challenge us. We're gods.
Yeah,
Anyway, what did
your
you want
gods,
to
you're untouchable.
be
Yeah, no,
contentious
I
about?
mean, yeah. So actually, I think the conversation we just had is a pretty good representation of a conversation that is actually quite peaceful, where there are probably different opinions about things. Um, but you're able to have a good conversation about it, right? In the end, where we're
I
not
love
yelling at each
convos.
other.
Well, yeah,
I
I
agree.
generally
I love them
only
too.
yell when people like I'm trying to match the energy of the convo. If people yell, I'll yell, whatever. But I like disagreeing with people.
Well,
Um,
it's good for views, to be honest. If you want, I can throw some Nazi slurs at you, even in German. I mean, that'd be pretty much in character.
that
Um,
would be pretty pointed. You don't have to though. In 45 minutes, I'm debating the Vanguard boys, so that's going to be a 2-on-1, and they both hate me. So I think that'll be the spicy dictate for the day.
they hate you. Who would hate you? You seem very cuddly.
They're
Um,
warmongers. It's just what they do. Um,
Really, they're warmongers. So then I have an interesting one for you. I don't think that the war in Iraq was for all, nor do I think that it was unjustified.
why do you think that?
Yeah, that's a weird one, huh?
Yeah, why do you
Uh,
think that?
yeah. Okay. So let me maybe dial that back. Just not dial it back in terms of the sentiment, but so first of all, um, you would agree, and I think that's an important premise to set. You would agree that the execution of an idea does not take away merit of the idea itself, right?
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So then we can talk about the idea rather than the execution of the idea, because I think we can all agree that the execution of the idea was terrible.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. There's also a reason behind that is deeply rooted in conservatives carrying out that war versus liberals, to be honest, because there's a lot of sort of, well, they will pick themselves up by the bootstrap if we just make sure that the dictator goes away.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it seems kind of bad on every level, from the whole lying about why we invaded to fucking everything up to
yeah.
the
So
civilians dying.
the lying about why you invaded, I'm not so sure that you necessarily lied,
Colin
in the
Powell lied to
sense
the
that,
UN. He's even admitted it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, what he said was not true. I don't know if he did that knowingly, though.
No,
Fully
he
knowing that there were no weapons of mass destruction before, because there were a number of UN resolutions by the Security Council before that, right?
well, we
Uh,
can't know there aren't any, but he did know that the information that he was provided, he was told by the Bush administration to exaggerate it to the point of dishonesty.
well, yeah, to exaggerate it, yeah, which is
Wait,
what
one
everybody
second.
essentially does,
Holy
right?
shit. One second. Okay, hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Did anyone else hear that? Could you hear that through my mic?
I did not hear anything. No.
Okay, okay, if a 9/11 happens sometime in the next 8 seconds, I called it. Holy, that was the most low. I don't think planes can fly that low. Was that a private plane? Someone's getting
Jesus.
grounded by the fucking Air Force. Jesus Christ.
Well, well, to be honest, I'm probably, with all the things that I've said in the past, and given the fact I've lived there, I'm probably on some Russian watch list. So don't be surprised if something happens to you next.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll keep that in mind. Jesus Christ. That like I could
yeah,
swear I could feel my house rumble from that. I have no. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
you'll
right.
actually find that the FSB is one of the least secretive secret agencies in the world.
It's pretty hard to hide
So
a
it would,
plane.
yeah. So indeed, they're the least secretive. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. You know, when we would move around as foreigners, they would, take pictures of us in a very weird way. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, So going back to the Iraq War. So first, like I said, there were a lot of. I mean, first there is the rational argument, which was the weapons of mass destruction weapons of mass destruction, right? Which were the chemical weapons that Iraq had used up until that point, i.e., the Iraqi government had used to subdue both Iranian population as well as Iraqi population, kill scores of people indiscriminately, and then subsequently violate pretty much every United Nations Security Council resolution, right? That is essentially what the lead up to that was. And at that point, the United States was essentially looking not for a pretext, because there was ample pretext, but they were looking at sort of a way that would give them to the go ahead to finally pull the trigger for something that they thought was actually accurate, which it ultimately wasn't. To some degree it was, but mostly it wasn't. But I mean, it's not like, I think that the premise that is, or the sort of the supposition that is sometimes made about this is sort of the United States decided to invade just on a whim. And there was no lead up to that. The entire United Nations Security Council deliberations before that, and the United Nations Security Council resolutions were not, they happened. All of that did happen. Um, and that, yeah, for me, that set the betting for ultimately what was invasion. That is one. The second thing is, I mean, Saddam Hussein was probably one of the worst dictators that we've ever seen, right? It was a horrible, horrible, horrible place to be in terms of having a dictator that would massacre parts of the population in very indiscriminate ways. Having a son going around kidnapping women, raping them, and then killing them with acid. It wasn't a not. It wasn't not that it wasn't even a democracy. It wasn't even close to a democracy, right? It was the worst of the worst. Um, I would argue that if you're in a position where you can change something like that, you should. Um,
Okay.
Ultimately, the execution of it, I think, just gives it a bad rep. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things.
Hmm.
First of all, I like the Colin Powell. I mean, the administration did lie. I mean, this is just a blurb from the Wikipedia page. A Senate report on Intel failures would later detail the intense debate that went on behind the scenes as to what to include in Powell's speech to the UN. State Department analysts had found dozens of factual problems in drafts of the speech. Some of the claims were taken out, but others were left in, such as claims based on the Yellow Cake forgery. The administration came under fire for having acted on faulty intelligence, particularly that which was single sourced to the informant known as Curveball. Dick Cheney later said to Powell, joking before he gave the speech, saying, "You've got high poll ratings. You can afford to lose a few points. Go up there and sell it.
Hmm.
We'll have moved forward a peg or two. Fall on your damn sword and kill yourself, and I'll be happy too." But that last bit was from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Um, so it seems like the is pretty obviously like a dishonest like forwarding for the thing. Look, I don't necessarily have a problem with murking dictators. The
Hmm.
issue is that the whole nation rebuilding shit just doesn't work. Like we can't actually do it. Like it's always gonna fuck up, like every time.
It
Um,
worked in Germany.
well, we occupied that country until like 91. I mean, West Germany was basically like the
Hmm.
West occupation, and we didn't just murk the German leader. We engaged in total war. We firebombed Dresden. I mean, we killed a lot of people, but we did it because they were invading everyone, right? I mean, but with
Yeah,
with Saddam Hussein, like he, not quite the same world threat as the Nazi regime. I don't
yeah, but
necessarily have a problem with murking bad leaders or anything. It's just if you're gonna do that, you have to do it right. And this like nation
mhm.
rebuilding project, I mean, it has a death toll in like the 6, 7 figures. It's not a workable strategy.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. So, but then again, I mean, let's imagine they did have because we didn't know that, right? And that I don't think, again, that's part of the execution, not the idea. The idea to remove a dictator like Saddam Hussein, who has shown intent to bomb, countries around, to commit all kinds of human rights violations, to remove that kind of dictator. The idea seems like a pretty good one to me, right? You would agree with that, I guess.
Yeah, but like that's not what people complain about with the Iraq War. No lefty is like, I hate the Iraq War because Saddam Hussein died. Like it's every other thing that happened. And
No,
past
that's
a
not
point, it's
entirely
like a
true, though.
combo. I mean, for the most part, like Saddam Hussein's not like an icon of like lefty, idolatry or whatever.
Well,
Um,
it's non-interventionism, right?
sure,
It's the
because of interventionism led to what happened in Iraq, right? But it's not Saddam Hussein himself that's the issue. It's that when we intervene in countries, even with good intentions, which I don't think we had there, but even if we did, it seems to like lead to really bad outcomes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a couple things. So first, the invasion of the occupation of Germany did lead not to bad outcomes. It led to pretty good outcomes, right? And it wasn't within 70. What was it? 45 years of occupation. It took way less, right? It took around a decade for things to really start turning around because of the Marshall Plan, which is a much better model.
Yeah,
I think what you do have I think there's, I mean, obviously, I will not dispute the fact that the execution was poor, especially in terms of underestimating the challenge, because the Iraqi government or the Iraq as a country is such a different country in terms of cultural heritage. Again, it's not a nation, right? In terms of the description I gave earlier of what are some of the prerequisites for successful nations, which is a shared history. I mean, one of the big problems that you have in Iraq is just the difference of opinion that people within Iraq have about what Iraq is and should be, to the degree that they're willing to kill each other, right? I mean, between Shiite Muslims and Sunni Muslims, there is and has rarely been really a common
but
understanding
there
also within Iraq, right?
there was the reasons why occupation of Japan and Germany worked, whereas occupation of Iraq didn't. I mean, there were like so many of them, right? Obviously, cultural relations is a huge part of it. Like there's a lot of it is also like pretext, right? Um, from the perspective of the Iraqi people, we have always been colonizers. But the Germans didn't feel that way, right? Like we have documentation of how
Mm.
the Germans felt after the Nazi regime collapsed. The ultimate, like the biggest feeling they had was guilt. And that's like a huge motivator for moving forward. We like they knew they started the war. We went in there. We fucked them right up, and they were like the Germans after World War II were like in a sense complicit in our occupation because I guess they kind of knew that they accepted this. But with Iraq, like that wasn't really present. Saddam didn't invade Iraq. We just fucking showed up and broke a bunch of shit. There was nowhere near like the national pretext that would have allowed for a successful occupation. Also, Germany was a fully developed modern country. Iraq not so much. Meaning that
Well,
we weren't able to really capitalize on like a successive boom of economic growth in Germany. We weren't really able to prompt it the same way. Um,
well, well, not entirely. That's not entirely accurate. I don't think so. First, Germany also had a pretty complex history before that, right? They went similar to Russia, actually. They went through obviously the First World War, which analogous, I guess, to the Cold War. Big collapse, big humiliation on the international stage, loss of national pride. Then they tried their hands at democracy, which failed miserably. Again, hyperinflation, things like that, right? During the Weimar Republic. And then there was a strong man that came around with all his propaganda and all his horrible words that sort of bewitched people to say, well, this is going to give us stability that we didn't have before. Then when everything was just bombed away, what people were looking for, they didn't feel guilt at once. That was not the overwhelming sentiment at once in Germany. I think that, and actually this is not just I think, this is how it was, because there's a lot of, especially German literature of the time, of German writers about that at that time, is really talks about the yearning for peace and just not having any more to deal with the bombings, not having to deal anymore with the destructions, which isn't so unlike what
Well,
is in Iraq. But what
we
the
did
US
cuff
did have,
them. Yeah.
yeah, you did. And, I still feel that's a funny one, to be honest. How Germans respond to war movies is a very funny experience, to be honest.
It's just
Uh,
like we have to acknowledge that the rebuilding efforts that took place in Germany and Japan, like this is a totally different. We can't just rebuild every country that has a dictator. Like the context. I mean, it took literally a world war crescendoing in the defeat and occupation of the Axis powers for that to be brought about to an end. Like the greatest world conflict in human history was necessary to provide the sufficient cultural pretext for a successful occupation and rebuilding of West Germany and Japan. But Iraq, we just fucking went in there, you know? I think if we really wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and like there are bad dictators all over the world, like the Saudi royal family being a pretty evident example of bad people we don't want to touch because it's beneficial to us that they stay where they are. But if we really wanted to do that, the best way to do that is you do the CIA classics. You either fund an insurgency group to the point that they're able to fight against the actual military of the country that you want the leadership deposed, or you have operatives in the country work with the subordinates of Saddam Hussein. And then Saddam Hussein slips on a banana peel, falls down the stairs, and somebody else takes charge, right? But like the full invasion thing, the shock and awe bullshit, like we pretended to be liberators, but nobody in Iraq saw us that way. It was like a wholly ineffective way of making that narrative, you know?
well, at first they did, then they didn't, right? I mean, the sentiment, I mean, it is also in Baghdad, you had, scores of people hating Saddam Hussein and wanting him gone. And there was hope that the United States would stop Saddam and would rebuild something better. It's just that, again, the execution was so poor that, and shock and awe really is not the sentiment here either. I mean, I can also tell you that in Germany at first, the sentiment against the United States and especially the Soviet Union because of the mass rapes was very negative. Right. There was a lot of hate also for the United States for the fire bombings in Dresden. But at the time, people were just yearning for it to stop. They were relatively wealthy before that, so they just wanted peace, which is similar to what people in Iraq wanted after the first year or so of the war, is for the war to stop as well, and for them to be able to engage in a peaceful manner with each other
Then we
and
stayed
go.
like forever after we had the surge in 2007. We sent more guys in. It was insane.
Exactly. Exactly, because the execution was poor. But again, the idea of it was not, right? The idea of going in was not a bad, it was not a bad idea. I mean, it was a bad idea under the context that, well, you didn't really have obviously a workable plan afterwards, but the sentiment of it wasn't wrong.
But the sentiment is like such a tiny fragment of what actually happened. I don't think the nation building stuff works. I mean, we try with Afghanistan, right? We literally spent 20 years there. They got rolled by the Taliban like the day we left. I don't think nation building really works. You can't impose development on a country. Um, Not under those circumstances. I mean, the only way if we wanted to really nation build, then we would do what the British did. We would go in there, kill literally half their people, and enslave the rest of them to build roads. It would be horrible, and they would resent us until literally the end of time. The problem is like America is trying to do like the humane liberal version of neo-colonial occupancy nation building, which doesn't, I don't think it works at all. It's not brutal enough to produce any outcomes outside of just like interminable I don't know, misery, budget holes. I don't think we're doing anything, right? Um, I
Hmm.
certainly don't think we should like go full fucking like Indian occupation or whatever. I think that's the worst direction. I just think like we're basically just trying to do like the liberal version of what we've always done, which is exerting colonial power around the world by pretending to be the shining city on the hill, by walking into the uncivilized countries
Well,
and being like, look, we'll rescue you, we'll save you from the decrepit nature of your internal political body, and then we like fuck everything up for 20 years.
yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm allowed to cuss, right?
Yes, you're allowed to cuss.
Okay, great. Well, I have to warn you, here in the Netherlands, people cuss like it's, like it's nobody's business. So I might cuss a little bit too much. If it gets too much, let me know. But
Yeah, we've been known
in
to do it a few times here. You'll be okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, but I mean, so in Germany, what we did have was, the whole country got essentially blasted to shit. And then after that, we had occupants coming in saying, well, we'll occupy you. And nobody could resist anyway, because pretty much our military was decimated. We didn't have any political leadership. And then there were four countries essentially taking ownership of ours, right? Um, I say ours, me being German. Obviously, not really having a whole lot in common with the country back then.
Yeah.
But now, that being said, then after that, there was a pretty large process of denazification. And there was a pretty lengthy process, also obviously spearheaded by the Nuremberg trials. It was incredibly important for people to turn the page, essentially understand history the same way, and start focusing on the road ahead. That was more important than sort of the cultural background that was there before that, because a lot of the people that were in the government afterwards in Germany, they were Nazis. I mean, a lot of the people that were governmental managers, regional managers, people that had done some real horrible shit, they were still in the government afterwards, and they were still convinced of their views, right? They still believed in their views. They were just not allowed to enact them. I agree with the idea here that if you're going to do nation building, you sort of have to have it hardcore. I wouldn't say you have to enslave people. I don't think people in Germany were enslaved, but at least not to that degree. I mean, if you're a Marxist, you might think so, but if you're not, then well, I guess you're not thinking that. But there was just a massive amount of money pumped into the economy of Germany.
We're
There was
never
a
going to
lot
do
of
that with Iraq, though.
yeah, and that's I think where it's wrong, right? I mean, there is a plan for nation building that is workable. It's complex, more complex in the case of Iraq, and it can work, but that's what should happen. And I don't think necessarily, I think that if you say that the sentiment is a tiny bit, I don't think that is true. I think that if you look at how quickly people started to go onto the streets when the Iraq war started to happen, how quickly thousands, if not millions, of people started to protest in London and in the US and in Germany. We didn't even go about this and say, we're not going to do this before we even had a chance to see if it would work out. It wasn't because of that. It was because people were just refusing, let's not intervene anywhere. Let's not start another war. Even if, and this is what my contention is, I think that if you have the ability to stop somebody like Saddam Hussein, you should, right? You absolutely should
I
stop
just
them.
I don't think the nation building ever could have worked here, like under any circumstances. The comparison would be like if we did a full-on invasion of Germany in like 1933 before World War II started. The people of
Mhm.
Germany would not be like vying for peace and willing to work with us after. They would fucking despise us. It would be like all the resentment of the Treaty of Versailles like 10 times over. Like if we preemptively
Potentially.
invaded them right after the Nazis came to power. You need like the narrative is important. Um,
Absolutely, the narrative is important, but the narrative was there, right?
not
Iraq
not
was
for
using chemical weapons against neighbors. It
I
was
mean,
using it against the Kurds.
yeah, but like that's not enough, right? Like Nazi Germany was already persecuting minorities back at that time. It took a world war to give us that momentum.
So what's the
To
threshold then?
legitimize. Well, I mean, the threshold is that just nation building is like a super rare phenomena. It only
I
worked
agree.
in Germany in large part because it shares like Germany shares a border with France. I mean, they're right next to each other. They were willing to invest the time and the money into this other industrialized nation. Germany started the war and lost it on its own terms and did such horrible shit that they could kind of have their nose rubbed in it. But that just
But so
none
did
of
the
that.
Iraqis, right? I mean, and the Iraqis knew they did feel like they were being taken hostage by this regime,
But
right?
but
A
like
lot of,
clearly it
Mhm.
didn't happen. Like it didn't work because we did the invasion of Iraq and we know
I
how they
agree.
feel about us, right? We
Yeah,
bombed.
now, not then.
Yeah, but we bombed Germany for years. We killed millions of Germans, and they still accepted us after we conquered them and started rebuilding them. That didn't
Not
happen
at
with Iraq.
first.
No,
Well, at first, there was a lot of resentment in Germany towards
but
Americans, right?
they
That
got
took time.
over it. But with Iraq, that didn't happen. That sympathy,
Exactly.
it did not take place, and I just don't think there was a sufficient national pretext for what we did, and we were never going to invest enough money in Iraq because Iraq is, with all respect, economically kind of a shithole, undeveloped, not a resource benefit to the West. Um,
Okay.
so
But
there wasn't it wasn't set in motion. It wasn't like the pieces weren't there, right?
right. So I think we can agree, perhaps to disagree on what makes enough of a pretext. I do think it could have worked. I don't think there was enough of an intention to make it work. I think there was a lot of blue-eyed stupidity, to be honest, on terms of, well, in this case, it happened to be the Republican president, of course, Bush, or whoever was responsible for this. And you'd be, I think, surprised if you look at government. There oftentimes is no grand conspiracy. It's one of the things that pisses me off the most, to be honest, about all of this. There's more incompetence in government and, well, to be honest, also in companies. There's no way that they could pull off this if this was a grand conspiracy just to get Iraq's all because it didn't even work. And if they did want that, they would invest a shit ton of money into Iraq to stabilize the economy and make sure that they have a grip on it, right? Which they don't, and they wouldn't. And if you say that they're not going to invest that amount of money into it to do that, then in my eyes the whole argument that this was for oil falls apart in the first place. That's a bit of a tangent, but again, we started by saying that the execution does not take away merit from the idea.
Well, if the
The
idea was
idea,
just quietly replacing Saddam, then I mean, there are ways I could get behind that.
yeah, well, I don't think you could quietly replace that guy. I don't know that that was something that was possible. And again, the United States has tried in the past to quietly replace people, and it hasn't worked out either,
Well,
right? I mean,
nation building
look at,
also hasn't worked out. I mean, by quietly
yeah,
replace, I mean like banana peel down the stairs or funding rebel groups. I mean anything other than full invasion.
yeah, but then somebody else will step up. I mean, I will say one thing: quietly replacing a leader has worked probably 0 times. Nation building has worked at least once.
Under such different circumstances, though.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean. I mean, zero. It has worked never versus it has worked once. Maybe we should actually invest a little bit of more time into understanding and exploring how we can make nation building work then,
Well, I think the
instead of,
first thing we need to do is not look like we're just colonizers or invaders.
true, true, and that's part of it. That's, I guess, part of the playbook then of how to build a nation, right? Is what's the narrative going in. And I think the United States did a particularly poor job at explaining the narrative. I do think, though, that given the Security Council resolutions that we had, Saddam's complete disregard for not just its own population, but also the population of countries around it. Iraq did invade Kuwait, if you remember in the 90s. They did threaten constantly. They attacked Iran. They threatened everybody constantly, and refused to abide by any of the chemical weapons rules. There was just no reason to believe that they didn't have chemical weapons. Intel is faulty a lot of times, so I don't think that they went. I don't think that the intent was malicious. And I think that
But
going
they lied.
into, yeah, again, you say that they lied in this, again, the quote that what you cited earlier to me, and I may be wrong, I'm perfectly willing to admit that if I'm wrong about this. Again, this might be just getting into semantics of what it means to lie. But to me, that does not seem like they went there and just had an idea to go into Iraq for oil and were looking for anything to justify it.
Why not? I mean, I don't. I think the oil thing is largely overplayed. I think a lot of it is just, a hegemon's
It
going to
plays a
hegemon.
role.
It plays a role,
Yeah,
but I think
but it's
they
not the
wanted to
reason.
lie to justify it. Americans, like the Bush administration, wanted to frame it like it was a humanitarian intervention, which it absolutely was not. No element of our occupation was structured the way a humanitarian intervention would be structured. It was an invasion. And then we fucked it up on every level, but they wanted to, like, you know, there's such a huge threat of all these weapons. So, and Colin Powell, I mean, just said, like, yeah, there was an intel report beforehand where they pointed out lies in Colin Powell's speech that weren't addressed for the speech. I mean, they left stuff in there that was wrong.
Yeah, so exactly. But then again, I think when you read that quote, and when you that Cheney quote and Powell's quote, the way that they're portraying it is not one where they said we lied in the sense of, well, this was just complete bullshit, right? It was a sense of, we needed to convince the world. We had enough intel to suggest this, but not good enough for us to be 100% certain. We just, we used that information and completely overplayed our hand. And I agree, they overplayed it, which ultimately wound up biting them in the ass anyway, right?
I
I think
mean,
if they had gone
if
about it in a different way,
if
yeah.
they knew there were inaccuracies in the speech, but they went ahead with the speech, I don't. That seems like about as deliberate a lie as you can get, right? I mean, because they're post hoc justifying it. They want the outcome of trying to get people to join the war. They're trying to sell it like an advertisement. If you're making a report to the United Nations on the likelihood of a nation having weapons of mass destruction, I don't think that's an acceptable time to, like, smudge the details because it's really important you make your case. I think you just have to present the intel you have. And a lot of the intel
Yeah.
they had ended up being from an unreliable source anyway. That what, curveball guy or something. Because a lot of those people were also operating on, like, yeah, the administration wants, like, a confirmation of WMDs, so you better find something. Like, the whole thing was kind of fucked from the ground up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, like I said, I agree with a lot of the sentiment. I think there are a couple points here that I think we will agree on. I think you will agree with me that, somebody like Saddam Hussein had no business staying in power. That person had to go, and we had to find a way to make that guy go. Um,
I don't think we
so
had
this,
to, but I think
why
it's
not?
kind of, because I don't always think that there are good outcomes to deposing bad people. Sometimes you just create a power vacuum, which is exactly what happened. We made ISIS. How many people have died as a result of ISIS? Um,
Yeah, I shit on, but you will never find out how many died because of Saddam
no,
Hussein, right?
well, estimates put it around 250,000. Um, the Under his
By
regime,
ISIS?
no, no, by Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, but you
Um,
can't estimate that. That's impossible.
You can. According to the Human Rights Watch, the total number of deaths and
Yeah,
disappearances related to repression during the period of his control over Iraq is estimated to be between 250,000 and 290,000, with the great majority of those coming as a result of the Anfal genocide in 1988 and the suppression of the Iraq uprisings in 1991.
yeah, that's a fun one. And I think maybe we can talk about not a fun one in that sense. I mean, a fun one in the sense of, um, I have a lot of love for Human Rights Watch, but there is a lot of incorrect assumptions that they sometimes make, and I actually have a pretty good example of that, which I know
I
for a
can't
fact.
second guess the human. So there might
I
be
agree.
issues with
Look,
those reports, but I don't have a way of, like, second
yeah, and
guessing
this,
that
yeah, and to be
info.
honest, this is also not really a point that is going to give us much discussion material. To be honest, it's just a matter of how you record those. That my point is, you can't really. It's going to be almost impossible to estimate that accurately. Similar to how it is almost impossible to estimate the the gang or drug war related violence in Latin America, right? The deaths from that, you can't estimate that because, well, a lot of people disappear and they're underreported as hell.
Yeah, and it's in an area
Um,
of the world that doesn't exactly have the best constant reporting data. The only data I can find on kills from ISIS is 33,000, but that's in 2016. I don't know how
yeah,
much. Maybe
that's
it's
not
a.
accurate at
Yeah,
all.
it's impossible to know. Anyway, like, you create power vacuums by killing leaders. I think if you're gonna, like, do a full on, like, government replacement of a foreign country, you better have, like, a really fucking good plan. And I think it's okay to
Exactly.
criticize the outcome if you come in with a shit plan after lying about it.
Yeah, well, again, I think we may have just a different definition of what constitutes lying. I think I don't get from this, and maybe I'm being too charitable to them, but I honestly believe I don't see that they admitted to lying. I don't think that they are lying, that they did lie.
I don't
I
think they've
think,
admitted to lying. I don't think Dick Cheney has ever admitted lying about the Iraq War. I'll admit that.
yeah, well, what you said earlier seemed to suggest that you did, but it's fine. I maybe just have misunderstood. But again, I think it's it it's a bit of defining what constitutes lying. I mean, if you say, to be very crude, if you're, or let's make it not so crude, if you're lying on your CV, for example, I don't know if you've ever written a CV, but if you have, people tend to embellish stuff there. And maybe you'll say you were a bigger part of something than perhaps you were. I don't know that necessarily constitutes lying. Obviously, it's I think they exaggerate it for sure. Is that enough to make it? They lied to justify they lied to justify a war when they didn't have anything. I think there was enough pretext there, to be honest, and there was also a long preamble that culminated in this. It's not like it happened just out of nowhere. It was years and years and years of this, of Iraq, specifically Saddam Hussein constantly violating pretty much every agreement that they ever made. And then, yeah, it just culminated in an invasion to depose a dictator, which was the initial idea, right? It was to depose the dictator. And at first, they were actually quite meticulous about it, but then the execution was it, which doesn't mean that the initial sentiment was wrong.
I mean, the initial sentiment um of George Floyd getting arrested was to get a confused fentanyl-ridden man to a holding cell for a day so we could shake it out. Like I don't know. Like past the point, I guess I just don't care about the intentions that much, right? Like the way it's actually acted on feels like it's the kind of the operative issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then um, but then we mostly will agree again on the intent. I mean, you may not care about the intent, but it does mean whether or not the idea or the intention was justified, right? Or the attempt, or it was justified in and of itself.
Well, I mean,
But in the out,
only if I don't know. I don't think the intent justifies the action. The likelihood of a successful outcome is what justifies it. Even if the United States government had had a bad intent, if they accidentally produced love, democracy, and progressivism in Iraq somehow, I would be in favor of that. Even if the intent was fucked, I mean, whatever, the action turned out good, and whatever process they must have used to achieve that action is, a workable process. But I don't think this is a workable process. So even if the intent, like, it's like those like faith prayer guys, like, hey, don't get chemo for your cancer, like, you know pray and light these candles and it'll go away. Even if their intent is perfect, I mean, if the mechanism they're using to achieve that intent is fucked, I'll still treat them like a murderer, I guess, or at the very least like a negligent manslaughter. Or
yeah, well, I will treat them as for sure negligent as well, but it doesn't subtract from the fact that, and you may not want to say it out like this, but it does not subtract from the fact that the idea itself is not a bad one.
well, the idea of getting
Um,
rid of cancer is a good one,
exactly.
but then it's like prayer healing, right? I mean, at that point, like the idea, the intent behind it's not important to me. The process is just too bad.
Yeah, exactly. So again, but that again, I think we're going to be going in circles here.
Yeah, probably.
The execution is poor. The idea was, I guess, in my opinion, the idea was the right one because that guy had to go. He definitely had to go. Um, I think the sympathy for the Iraqi people, to be honest, not just for the Iraqi people, but for the Arab world in general, has to outweigh well, maybe if we leave this guy in place, we'll have stability, and then just let that guy slaughter people nonstop, right? The execution was terrible, and we should definitely not. Nobody should ever do that again, but not that way. But we should still not fret or shy away from trying to get rid of people that are causing that much harm, right? I think that's the wrong learning to take away from that.
Well,
The learning that we should,
God willing, we'll apply these standards to Russia soon. We'll drone strike the Kremlin bedroom.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's very easy to build a drone that just um, targets one person and explodes on their forehead or explodes anywhere near them. It's pretty easy to do that. I mean, computer vision is advanced enough to do shit like that.
We'll get him soon. I uh,
Yeah,
I
we're
I actually only have 8 minutes before I argue with the Vanguard guys, so I need to take a deep breath and lead line my brain against a cancerous radiation before we do that.
Oh
Um,
no, I'm so sorry. Well, I hope that you at least enjoyed the
no, I
conversation to some
enjoyed it very
degree.
much. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, if you want to talk about any of the other topics, especially when it comes to the drug war, um, I lived in Latin America for 12 years, know quite a bit about it.
I'm in quite a few
There's
places.
another take for you there. I'd love to talk about it.
Gotcha. Well, feel free to send me a follow-up email because I've got a pretty bad memory. Um, Thank you. I
Gotcha,
had
no
a good
problem.
time, and I'll talk to you maybe in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Vaush.
All
Or
right.
what should I call you, Vaush? Ian?
Everyone
What's
calls me Vaush. You can call me either. I don't care.
okay, sure. Thank you, brother.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye. All right. I strongly disagree with that guy on a lot, but it was also a fun convo. That was fun. The Iraq War caused more deaths than are attributed to Saddam Hussein. I think 500,000 or so excess deaths are attached to the Iraq War. So yeah, so that's probably pretty cringe. I was looking at economics of Iraq, and I didn't know this, but apparently before the first Gulf War, for some reason, Iraq had a massive GDP per capita spike, reaching 10,300, which was quadruple what Iran had. I assume this was war gold. I assume this was the Kuwait, like they yoinked oil, right? Like, yeah, it was wartime production, I assume. But even before the product of that war, they were above other Middle Eastern countries. They were double Turkey's GDP per capita. That's crazy. And then the first Gulf War happened, and their GDP dropped to 22, or sorry, GDP per capita. It went from 10,356 per capita to 22. Yikes. Iraq used to be one of the most prosperous nations in the Middle East. Yeah, I mean, by standards of development. I don't know how well that would have translated long term. I had no idea the Gulf War. I had no idea that the Gulf War led to more of an economic collapse in Iraq than the Iraq War did. I didn't know that. Like, kaboom. Holy shit. The Iraq War in comparison is kind of minimal. I mean, it's not minimal. Their IQ dropped by 60 or IQ, Jesus. Their GDP dropped by 60% per capita. Their GDP per capita by 60%. But then after two wait, no, 2003 was when we invaded. Wait, their GDP went up during the invasion? Wait, hold on. We invaded Iraq in 2003. Their GDP went up like every year except for did it drop in 2009 because of the surge in 2007? Fucking weird. Okay, whatever. That's huh. Nation building? Yeah, I get maybe it does work. Let's take a look at Afghanistan. Dude, what? Hold on. Should we just invade countries to make their GDP per capita go up? What the fuck? Okay, so Afghanistan from the Soviet Union's invasion just enjoyed a constant holy shit. The USSR fucked Afghanistan so badly that no GDP per capita data was taken for 21 years. Wow. Jesus Christ. It's not a continuous decline. There were just no data points entered for 2 decades because of what the Soviet Union did. Jesus. Okay, well anyway, then we invaded and their GDP went up. Easy clap, boys. Easy clap. That guy was onto something? Yeah, fuck. I guess we just need constant wars of occupation to help the third world or something. Woo! Also, Syria will be good to look at. Okay, to be fair, though, Syria is like the most fucked. So many things are happening in Syria, you know? Okay, here we have Syria. This is GDP per capita, remember, not just GDP. Okay, so we peak here in the 80s. Okay, they're going up more. Look at Afghanistan down there. Fuck, man. Ukraine is skyrocketing right now to the moon, but this chart ends in 2007. Oh, It ends at 2007 because since 2007, they haven't been able to take any data points from Syria because Syria has been in an interminable fucking war. Okay. Jesus Christ. I'm so fucking glad I live in America, dude. Holy shit. Oh my god. Only thing I have to worry about here is getting shot at my local McDonald's. Look at that clean line, baby. Ooh. Look at Canada and Ukraine. Look at these shitters down here. Look at their GDP per capita flagging. Look at America, just line going up, undeterred. Did I say Ukraine? I'm so tired, dude. No, unlike the UK, Ukraine's GDP is going up right now, actually. Show China? China's going up, yeah. They're flagging a bit, but they're still going up. India is like holding strong at dog shit. Russia's on the goddamn loop-de-loop train over here. Isn't it crazy how all the humanitarian disasters in less fortunate countries correspond to an increase in their GDP per capita? Look, guys, it's the fucking shock doctrine. Oh, here's the 2008 financial crisis. Ooh, that sucked. Let's go back up. 2013. Wait, did it drop in 2014 because of the fucking Donbass? Wait, did Russia's GDP suffer due to a commitment to was it because Ukraine broke away from like holy shit, no wonder they're mad. Yeah, the Crimea. Yeah, I didn't realize the Crimea sanctions. Oh my god. Woo! On the roller coaster. Woo! Woo! What happened? Ukraine chose democracy, freedom, and bald eagles. Russia got mad and annexed Crimea. The world sanctioned them. Obama sanctioned them. God bless Obama.